There are places we are not meant to find, coordinates erased, fences unmarked, names never spoken. They are called many things: black sites, phantom zones, ghost installations. But among those who trade in secrets, they are known by another name. The points that shouldn't be. In the high deserts of Turkmenistan, buried beneath a veil of sand and silence, once stood a facility known only in whispers as Object K-116. Officially, it never existed. Not on Soviet maps, not in NATO briefings, not in the memories of those who built it. And yet, it was real. As real as the shadows are cast at dusk across a plain where nothing else dared grow. Its story begins, as all haunting things do, with an absence. In 1973, a French satellite imaging team noticed a peculiar anomaly along the eastern Caspian frontier. One slide, that same square, the room fell silent. No explanation was given. The file was marked burn after review. A patch of land perfectly square, unnaturally dark, always clouded, even when surrounding terrain was clear. The CIA opened a black-budget program named Echo Lantern. MI6 reactivated Cold War assets. A city near its edge, Krasnogradwelv, disappeared overnight from registry rolls. Its 14,000 residents were either relocated or something else. Families received telegrams stating, "Due to operational consolidation, your relative's employment zone has been dissolved." No further communication was permitted. The Soviets, sensing exposure, began what would later be called the cleansing protocols. Not to protect the facility, but to erase all memory that it had ever been built. Atmospheric interference was the explanation offered, but one analyst, a man named Lucien Moreau, became obsessed. It registered only 4.3 on conventional scales, barely more than a whisper. But the wave pattern was wrong, sideways, rotational, instruments spun instead of ticking. In Ashgabat, technicians monitoring geologic telemetry reported that underground sensors at one site had simply stopped returning data. Not failed, vanished, like a wire that no longer had anything on the other end. He ordered more images, and each time, the square remained unchanging, black. He spoke of pressure vacuums in the eastern Caspian, sudden silences in radar, dust that moved against prevailing direction. He ended with a question: what breathes beneath dead land? Still, pale, malnourished, and trembling, he carried a single object, a hand-drawn map, stained with blood and engine grease. It documented rising cases of auditory hallucinations, psychogenic fugue states, and sleepwalking episodes among field agents who had spent time near the K-116 vector. Some drew symbols in their sleep. Others spoke in reversed Russian. One attempted to gouge his own eyes out, screaming, "They are watching backwards." It showed a desert, a railway. "Do not go there," he said. No note. No foul play suspected, but the pages of his manuscript were missing. Every last one. We built something. We couldn't unbuild it. Months later, Lucien disappeared. 3 years afterward, during a classified NATO symposium in Brussels, an American colonel with eyes like gunmetal presented a briefing entitled Non-Navigable Zones of Eurasia. But secrets, like rot, spread quietly through the walls. In 1981, a Soviet defector, Kodine Nightingale, was smuggled across the Finnish border. His debriefing ran for 93 hours. Tapes of his voice degraded unnaturally fast in storage. Several were destroyed. What remained were fragments, partial transcripts, words like containment breach, non-linear reactions, and most chilling of all, the noise that bends men. After that, a quiet panic took root in Western intelligence circles. By 1985, even Russian internal maps had no record of the K-116 sector. But then came the tremor. On February 4, 1987, at 3:17 a.m. local time, a seismic disturbance rippled across the Karakum Desert. Later that month, an atmospheric chemist from the Czech Academy, Dr. Vaclav Remik, gave a closed-door lecture in Prague titled A Study of Synthetic Winds. 3 days later, he was found hanging in his study. Meanwhile, in Washington, a report titled Event Horizon Incidents, Containment Unknown was presented to the Senate Intelligence Committee in a sealed room. And yet, despite mounting evidence, governments across the world agreed, silently, unanimously, to stop asking. Why? Because something inside Object K-116 was not asleep, and because the men who built it had made a mistake they could never explain. They opened a chamber without a door. It was called the Room Without Angles. Deep beneath Object K-116, past 4 sealed corridors, each locked behind blast doors the thickness of train cars, lay a structure unlike anything else in Soviet architecture. Where Cold War bunkers were normally brutalist and rigid, this chamber curved. No straight lines, no corners, a perfect ovoid, carved from polished basalt-like stone that no one remembered sourcing. The walls pulsed faintly under touch, warm like skin. Radios captured whispers in no language, spoken in reverse. But most disturbing of all, time felt different inside. Watches ran slow. Photographs taken inside developed with figures in different positions than they had stood, and in the center stood a platform not built, but grown, as if the chamber itself had formed around it. Only a few men had ever entered the room. Fewer still emerged, sane. Of the original 24 engineers assigned to subsector C7 went missing, 5 committed suicide within months, even buried livestock nearby to monitor for biological response. Still, the chamber pulsed beneath. Still, dreams leaked upward. He was observed via infrared from a sealed observation deck. He stood in silence for 19 minutes. Then, without touching anything, he removed his sidearm and shot himself in the chest. Not intelligent in the traditional sense, but not passive. The bullet entered at a downward angle. Impossible, unless he'd been kneeling before something. New personnel came, unaware of the bones beneath their boots. But the land remembered. Dust shifted against gravity. Birds never flew overhead, and equipment, no matter how modern, always drifted off calibration after 96 hours on site. Still, whispers turned the walls to paper. It transmitted one final image before going dark. The photograph showed K116 from above, but in place of the base was a perfect black circle. No shadows, no surface detail, just void. Analysts called it a processing glitch, and one, a geophysicist named Anton Petrov, drew spirals in his food until his death, mumbling, "It sees when we measure." According to declassified fragments, the room was not part of the original K116 blueprint. The Soviets designated the site Chertovkad, or Devil's Corridor, and installed a lead-encased laboratory around it, and the room was sealed under meters of reinforced silence. Instruments were placed. Observations began. During excavation in 1969, drills hit a hollow space, a natural cavern. Perhaps, though none of the rock matched local strata, the lead architect, Colonel Vasily Karinov, ordered entry. What they found wasn't a cave. It was already a chamber, clean, waiting, identical dreams. Vast deserts, monoliths that hummed without sound, a tall figure with no face, pointing upward toward a black sun. Then came the physical symptoms. Nosebleeds, teeth falling out, hair whitening overnight. One technician tried to drill into his own skull, reportedly to let the signal out. Batteries drained, tires deflated. A worker attempting to cut a chain-link fence fell into seizures after speaking 3 words in a voice that wasn't his. Within weeks, anomalies began. Magnetic fields inverted, lights flickered in rhythms that matched no known frequency. Still, command pressed forward. This was the age of triumph over mystery, of man bending the world to his will. That's when the dream started. At first, only among the scientists stationed nearest the chamber. By 1971, Moscow ordered containment. But how do you contain something you cannot name? They poured concrete into the entrance shaft, lined it with radiation scrambling mesh, installed white noise generators around the clock. In 1974, Koronov himself entered the room for a final survey. His blood formed a perfect circle on the stone. The file describing this incident ended with a note. Object may be responsive. Years passed. The room remained sealed. Object K116 was converted into a listening post, then a deep storage archive. In 1982, a Soviet satellite known as Quant 7 malfunctioned while over the site. But one technician enlarged the image, adjusted for infrared scatter, and enhanced it. There, barely visible, was a symbol carved into the earth. A spiral, etched so deep it distorted heat patterns. No one admitted ordering it, because by then, no one knew who still held authority over the site. By 1985, Object K116 was officially decommissioned. Bulldozers arrived to flatten the compound, but on the morning of demolition, all machines failed. He said, "It never closed." And then the world moved on, or pretended to. K2116 was erased from maps. Krasnograd 12 became a myth, but those who once stood near it, who dreamt its shape in fevered sleep, would all report the same thing. Years later, they could still hear something. Not a voice, but a rhythm. As if somewhere, far beneath dead soil, something was breathing and waiting. The year was 1992, and the Soviet Union was no more. Borders had collapsed like tired lungs, archives unlocked, generals disappeared, and for the first time in decades, secrets, long buried, began to crawl into the daylight. Among the many files that surfaced during the disintegration was one marked Duzaran, a black dossier with no return address, no classification seal, only a blood stain along the bottom edge, and a warning stamped in Cyrillic. This must never reach the waking world. It did. A Belarusian journalist named Elena Markovich found the file inside an abandoned Ministry of Energy warehouse in Minsk. She had been searching for proof of nuclear dumping, not ghosts. But the deeper she read, the colder the room became. Inside the file were transcripts of interviews, but not with prisoners or soldiers. Their testimonies were fragmented, repetitive, but eerily aligned. Time bends near the chamber. You remember things you haven't lived. There is a sound under the silence. It follows you into your sleep. We are not alone, but we are not with others either. More disturbingly, nearly all of them spoke of the figure in the corner. Not always seen, sometimes just felt. A presence that pressed against the edge of vision, never moving, never approaching, but always there, watching. Some tried to draw it. None could finish. One man, an officer named Denisov, tore his own eyes out in a hospital ward, screaming. It's behind the lines. It lives between the measurements. Elena published her findings anonymously under the title, The Breathing Place, releasing scanned documents and excerpts online. The piece gained viral attention for a single week, then was purged from every major server. Hosting sites crashed. IPs traced to mirror uploads led to non-existent addresses. They called themselves the Third Section, a reference to the Tsarist secret police, though this new group dealt not in rebellion, but recursion. Their task: locate the remnants of Object K-116, assess containment, and if necessary, re-establish the blackout. Elena herself vanished on March 19, 1993. Her apartment was found untouched, the tea on her stove still warm, but her notebooks, her printed drafts, were gone. A soft oscillation. One analyst described it as like a heartbeat, but dreaming. Another, more unnerved, claimed it sounded like someone humming a lullaby underwater, endlessly, without breath, not by resistance, but by absence. The terrain had shifted. Its title was simple: If found, do not wake. Satellite topography indicated a 6-meter depression where the command tower once stood. A perfect oval, smooth as bone, no wreckage, no fencing, no road. What remained, stored offline by a handful of archivists, was a single sentence scrawled on the back of the file's final page. It doesn't want freedom. It wants attention. A mining operation in western Uzbekistan collapsed after drillers struck a layer of rock that bled a fluid with no known composition. But somewhere in the folds of Eurasia, under silent dust and erased names, a chamber still. Survivors spoke of a whispering wind underground that moved against gravity. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a quiet revival was underway. Former intelligence officers, no longer bound by the party but still tied by memory, began to gather. But something had changed. In 1998, 5 separate reconnaissance satellites tasked with depuration terrain mapping had gone dark, all during passes over the former K116 region. Solar interference. When a drone team was dispatched to the coordinates once marking the facilities center, the Earth refused entry. And then there was the audio. Buried deep in the spectrum, beyond human hearing, was a signal. 3 weeks later, the analyst hung himself. The Third Section disbanded, but not before one final act. They submitted a sealed document to the Russian State Archive, classified to remain unopened until the year 2091. Elsewhere, strange patterns emerged. A university in Kazakhstan reported 14 students abandoning their research on prehistoric geology after claiming to hear the sand thinking. And in the United States, a declassified DARPA memorandum revealed that between 1996 unofficially, one line, handwritten, in the margin of the report. We looked down, and it looked back. For decades, the world had moved on. Wars came and went. Empires fell. Technologies rose. Not active, not asleep, just watching and waiting for someone, anyone, to remember it aloud. In the autumn of 2017, a storm struck the Karakum Desert. Nothing unusual. Sandstorms were common in that region, but this one did not move with the wind. It spiraled, centered precisely over a 3-kilometer radius that no local had dared enter for generations. Old shepherds called it the circle of sleep. Satellites caught only static. One frame, briefly, showed something. Former analysts, operatives, linguists, all retired, all with tangential connections to OBZ K116, began reporting identical symptoms. Lucid dreams, migraines triggered by topographic maps, and an inability to say certain words aloud without bleeding from the gums. Its code name, Project Voron, after the Russian word for raven. A bird that remembers faces. The task force's purpose was not to excavate or investigate, but to collect testimonies, drawings, dreams. Most were discarded. But one stood out. The most common of those words was chamber, a spiral in the sand, then nothing. Days later, a young field researcher from the University of Tashkent Anara Beksultanova ventured into the zone. She was tracing stories of songs beneath the dunes for her dissertation. But no governments moved. No officials spoke, because somewhere along the line, the fear had shifted. Her last known communication was a voicemail to her advisor. 8 seconds of static, followed by a single whispered phrase, "There are rooms inside us." She was never seen again. That same month, something strange happened across multiple intelligence agencies in 5 countries. A multinational task force was quietly formed under UN oversight. He drew, in crayon, a perfect rendition of the room without angles. The proportions, the curvature, the stone platform, all exact. In the lower right corner, in a jagged scrawl, far too precise for his hand, he wrote, "I remember the inside. It came from a child, 9 years old. No known connection to military or intelligence networks." When questioned, he simply said, "It was waiting for me when I was asleep." By 2021, murmurs began circulating through encrypted channels of electromagnetic fluctuations in Central Asia, of desert birds migrating away from ancestral patterns, of compasses spinning near old Soviet wreckage. It was no longer fear of what the chamber could do. It was fear that it had already done it. You see, the room without angles did not need to be opened again. It had already opened once, and that was enough, because its purpose had never been containment. Its purpose was infection, not biological, not viral, but conceptual, a shape that should not exist. A space that bent logic, a presence that nested in memory like a tick behind the eye. Every person who had seen it, dreamed of it, even heard of it, carried it, not as knowledge, but as seed. And some seeds grow slowly. In 2023, at a remote art exhibit in Prague, an anonymous sculpture was unveiled. It showed no title, no artist's name, just stone, smooth and black, curved in impossible geometry. And in its center, a platform. The exact form of the room. No media covered it, but over 400 attendees experienced sudden nosebleeds, vertigo, or dissociation. The piece was quietly removed. The gallery director was later found in his office, having written the same phrase over 200 times on the walls. It will find center again. And so we come to the present. You may ask, why tell this story now? Why speak of a place no one dares name, buried beneath deserts most maps won't show? Because remembering is the only defense, because the silence is spreading, and because if you're rehearing this, truly hearing it, the room has already turned its face toward you, not to punish, not to consume, just to know you exist, because it has always known what we've tried to forget, that forgetting is only the first phase of surrender, and some things, once whispered, cannot be made quiet again.